how has fighting changed since the 1940s?
Oh boy, when I think about, just think about the amount of men, for instance, that are killed in Iwo Jima, on the landing shores of Iwo Jima, like, I don't know what it was, 22,000 or something like that. And you think, not that you want anybody to be killed in any war, but when you think of the war right now over in Iraq, how many years has that been going on? And what is the casualty number? It's really, hate to say it, but insignificant compared to what happened on one day on a beach there. And that's what we would do. We'd go to the movies because we didn't have the TV, we had radio. And they always had, in all the double features, and there was always newsreels in the middle. And then all you would see were these pictures of these men running on the beaches and everybody killed, and it was not instant like you see it now, but it was a very horrifying thing. And it's different because you don't see that now where men are necessarily charging the beaches. Everything is done with much more superior weapons. And there's a lot of things that are the planes, for instance, those were prop planes in those days. Now they're jets. And there isn't that close contact. People are, being affected hundreds of miles away by some rocket, which we didn't have in those days.
How was the bombing of Pearl Harbor, or how does the bombing of Pearl Harbor relate to the tragedy, like to a tragedy like 9/11?
Well, see now, if you lived during those times and you knew about all these people dying and all the atrocities that were being committed in the war, and you talked to people that came back, and it was a terrifying time. And when they dropped the bomb on Pearl Harbor, we warned the Japanese twice. They didn't pay attention to us. They didn't drop it on the main cities. They dropped it on smaller cities. They didn't actually know the total results of it as well the second time they did. But we were happy. We were thrilled. We were delighted. We were overjoyed. These people who had bombed and attacked us, an innocent nation, we did not have any regrets about what happened over there at all. And I hate to say this, it sounds really bad, but I sit here now and have people look and say, oh, how evil we were. Well, when you don't live there, you can't criticize the people because you might have done the same thing. And to be honest with you, feeling the way we did in those days, you'd want to do it again. And as far as 9/11 is concerned, that was a terrorist attack against our country. I don't think there's any relationship to it at all. I mean, that was done because they attacked us in the Pearl Harbor, and we saved our country. Could have been overcome by them very easily, and had it been, you and I would not be talking here now, and we'd be talking Japanese. And we helped Japan come back to be the superpower that they are. So when people criticize America, it irritates me tremendously. And 9/11 was an attack against our country by terrorists, and has not anything to do, as far as that is concerned, in my mind.
Did you notice a difference on how people acted back then about war than how they do now?
Well, I don't think anybody really wanted a war, but my recollection of it was definitely there was a tremendous patriotism at that time. You didn't have a lot of people. Now, maybe there were draft dodgers who ran away to Canada or something. I don't know. In fact, I even heard stories about people committing suicide, young men, because they weren't drafted. They weren't allowed to get in because they were 4F, and all their other friends were. But there was a lot of patriotism, and and also the thing that is majorly different is the press. I mean, there were big signs of Uncle Sam with his like this, shh, don't talk. And well, they didn't broadcast every little thing that was going to happen in advance, so that when the troops landed, the Japanese weren't sitting there waiting for them because the newsreels told them all about it. Nowadays, I really think there was this whole idea about everybody knowing everything about everything, in my mind, is not very safe for the troops when they do that. And they didn't do that in those days. There was much more privacy, much more silence, emphasis on keeping things silent so we could protect the war effort.
Do you think it's important to keep up with our nation's news, old and new?
Yes, of course I do. I think it's very important for people to keep up what's going on now. But you can't understand what happened today if you don't look back in history. You can go way back to things like the Civil War, and all the history repeats itself. So it's really kind of interesting I think it's vital, in fact, that people know about the history of their country and other countries, but ours especially, going way back to the Revolution and all the wars that we've had. I think it's vitally important that we know past and present. So.
All right. Well, thank you for your interview. And yeah.
Well, I was very happy. This is a subject that is very close to my heart, as you can tell. I have very strong feelings. My husband was in the occupation forces in Japan. And he went over there, and the Japanese at the time of that was, if you have time to listen to this, the Japanese were very subservient when they lost the war because that's how the people were taught. And he said that he'd walk down the streets, and General MacArthur was a major general in those days, and he had returned to the Philippines, and when he was instrumental in the war and was over in Japan as the occupying general. And when MacArthur would come out, the Japanese would lay down in adoration, but he would not let them. He told them to get up. No, you do not do that. He treated them with respect after the war, and my husband said that the GIs, there were many people resented their presence, but they were very humble, and and some of the GIs weren't nice the way they treated some of the Japanese, but he said the majority of them were really nice and understanding, and he spent 3 years over there, so it was a really growing experience. He got to know a lot of Japanese, and met a lot of Japanese now in business. And one of the things that I found very interesting when we went to Pearl Harbor many years later, and you go to see the remains of some of those big carriers are still underground. I'm underwater. They raise the flag every day because they're still sailors entombed.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're surrounded by a whole bunch of Japanese people because they all were there too. But then now we're friends, and it's just a really interesting and sad thing that wars have to occur in the first place. But we didn't start that one, and we didn't start this with 9/11.
All right. Thanks.